Welcome to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast, presented by FantasyGolfBag.com, your number one source for the most in-depth PGA Tour analysis in the daily fantasy and sports betting world. Each week, our experts will discuss everything you need to know, from the course preview and key stats to top plays, fades, and strategies. Whether golf betting, grinding out cash games, or playing for a big GPP win, our team has you covered. Let's get after it.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. I'm your host, Redkacheek, and we'll be previewing the Houston Open played at Golf Club of Houston. If you haven't seen the pricing yet, it's a bit of a sticker shock on some of these guys, jumping like 30% since last week or the last couple weeks. But no fear. I have a couple tips for you to kind of wade through this week. Number one tip, if you haven't listened to Axis's podcast for the European Tour Irish Open, go do that because it is Guido Migliozzi week. He is on home soil, and Axis's podcast was actually like 30 minutes, perfect. But actually pretty funny. So go check that out if you haven't already. The Euro contests this week are actually pretty reasonable. So go ahead and reserve your entries in that. Check that out with Axis. And, of course, those stats that he uses for the podcast are available to you if you're a premium member or a VIP member at fantasygolfbag.com. The second tip for you handling the Houston Open is you probably just want to watch like Caddyshack this weekend and just don't play because it's rough. But no, it's not the worst. I think people get caught up a bit in the pricing. Like I heard a couple people, and I mean it's no big deal, I guess. But I mean people will see the pricing, be like, man, I just can't pay $10K for Brian Harman, or you see. Hendrik Stenson at $11K is fine, but let's say Pat Perez at nearly $10K. I can't pay for a Pat Perez at $9,700. That's just crazy. You kind of got to get the pricing out of your mind. Really most weeks, but certainly this week. I see it, obviously it's against the field and it's hard to compare pricing versus field strength. There's no real easy way. We have a few calculations I know Skylar creates, but we don't have that available to you to like determine field strength and how pricing is reflected against the field strength. Where Hendrik Stenson at 11.4 in this field is probably reasonable. Like it actually might be a value considering the field strength. Whereas if you go down the list to some of these guys in like the 8K range, which you're not normally seeing there, we'll say like Cameron Tringale as an example, he's probably a crazy good value at 8,700 with this field strength where he was 7,500 in, we'll say, a little bit stronger field 2 weeks ago. So a little bit of a price bump. It's relative. Probably the comparison if you're playing other sports. Football is probably not the best example, but we'll say NBA. So for any of you that play NBA, if some guy's on the Lakers with LeBron James and he's min price because he plays like 3 minutes, but during one game, LeBron James twists his ankle and he's out, and a guy comes in to fill in for him for the last quarter or something. Well, that guy's probably 3K that day, and the next game they play, considering LeBron James is out and this guy's going to play for 30 minutes, he's going to get priced up to, we'll say, 6K. Like he gets double his price bump, and you wouldn't sit back and say, man, that's just a crazy price for this guy. No, he's got a better opportunity to meet value, which is the same exact situation these guys are in when they get priced up. They have a better opportunity to meet value at that price. We'll say they're bumped up to reflect that opportunity. So don't get too caught up on the pricing. It's obviously a game. Everyone's going to have to deal with the same stuff, but there's values sprinkled out throughout here. Just don't get too concerned with seeing Sebastian Munoz, Denny McCarthy up here in 9Ks and like, man, he's usually a 7K player. Well, again, it's relative to the field strength, so take it with a grain of salt, play the game. Everyone's going to deal with it, and I think it makes it fun. I think these weeks are really fun to figure out where the value lies. I think Axis and I were kicking around ideas. He mentioned, a balanced approach on these weeks is the way to go. But honestly, if you catch a value in the 6Ks, it just takes one, and he could be super low owned by results of him just being priced down so far, and people don't go down there and look. But you could get one cheap guy, and all of a sudden, you fit two guys over 9K, or you get a 10K guy and two or three guys over 8K. Like, there's ways to build quote unquote stars and scrubs and feel good about it. So don't get too caught up with an overall strategy. I think you should wade through the player pool the same, balance off. Brian Harmon's a good play, or we'll say Russell Henley's a good play, but does it restrict you by going down too far, or are there not a lot of spots in the high 7K range that you like? Like, those are the kind of considerations. So I always advise people, if they are building cash lineups, if they do have someone up top, plug them in, but start from the bottom at some point, at least after your second guy or after your first guy. Start your second guy at the bottom, see how cheap you could go, and then get an idea of where your salary remains. So it's a fun week. I honestly probably will play a good mix on the Euro Tour. I'm sure I'll play a decent amount on the PGA Tour. But these are the kind of weeks where I feel like you're wanting to enter more lineups, because you start seeing guys around people that you do like, and like, man, there's not a big separation on their talent. Maybe lead-in form's a little bit different, or maybe their course history gives them a slight bump. But these are the kind of weeks where I feel like you get trapped into wanting to enter more and more lineups, and I don't want to do that this week so early in the season. But that's probably where my lean is. I'll probably reserve some Euros and then reserve a handful of PGA Tour events, PGA Tour contests, and then go from there. So we'll go ahead and dive into it. We'll try to keep this podcast short and sweet. Again, going solo, obviously, and then Axis has the Euro one. So let's go ahead and touch on the golf course. I think there's some interesting things to mention, and I'll try to focus this piece here more around the lines of this golf course being played at a different time of year. So the Houston Open missed last year's season. It was played back in, I think, 2018, and it was played in April. And the issue with that is, for one, April is a little bit of a cooler time of year for them going into it in Houston. So you got December, January, you have February, March. Pretty cool time of year. The benefit of that for them, their big deal was they were trying to get this golf course in a position that emulated Augusta National. I think this was the week prior to Augusta, or like 2 weeks prior. I'm pretty sure it was the week prior, but they would shave off the edges of the greens so that guys would have to chip off those tight lies that they see at Augusta. The reason why is they're trying to get guys to show up to this golf tournament. It was always a weaker field. So they were trying to give people a reason to want to play the Houston Open, and that was their reason. It was, the week before Augusta, and the course was cut similar to Augusta National. There's other things they did, like they mow the fairways. One half was into the grain, the other half was down grain. It's very weird stuff. Like, if you're just a casual DFS player and you don't really play golf, you don't realize this stuff. But like, having an approach shot with, we'll say, 120 yards with a wedge into the grain versus down grain is a big difference. So guys actually, they care about what side of the fairway they're on. And that was something that the Houston Open golf course superintendent tried to do to help guys get prepared for the Augusta National. So, like I said, it was April back then. This is obviously in October. The grass has changed. So that was bent grass back in the day. So I think it was Poa Trivialis with bent. Pretty good surface. Like, that's a good surface to putt on. And now it's Bermuda. The issue with Bermuda, obviously, is the grain. It's been a pretty hot summer, fairly dry. So I'm curious to see how the greens look. It might be a little bit baked out, a little bit bumpy, but overall, I'm not taking too much into consideration for the greens. I will say that I'm interested to hear some of the interviews, and I think this is where I was already leaning, but I'm curious to see if it kind of escalates a bit. If you're not aware of the area around Houston, Tropical Storm Imelda dropped about 18 inches of rain the third week of September. So this golf course actually sat underwater for 2.5 days, which is that's a long time to be soaking up water. They say that it drains fairly well. Obviously, a tropical storm dumping that much rain in a short period of time, I don't think anything can drain, well enough to get that out of there. But for the surface that they have, if it was sitting underwater for that much, like 2 weeks ago, it's it should be pretty soggy. So I'm really leaning towards guys that are longer off the tee. If I'm borderline on two guys, one's a little bit shorter. This isn't a great example because I'm not sure where I fall, but let's just use Brian Gay as an example. He's not the longest guy, and he might be, if I'm on the fence, that might be enough reason for me to take him out of the pool, because no matter how good he is with the putter, no matter how good he is with his long irons, if he's not getting 20 yards a roll in this golf course at 7,400 yards, it's going to be a beast for him. And I would prefer to grab guys that have a little bit more length and can kind of control their distances into the fairway so they can kind of place it for their second shots. It's not the longest course, so I'll go in and get into like key stats and stuff to consider for the golf course. It's not the longest course, so like it's a mix of holes. I'll just start from the top. So it's 7,400 yards, right? It's par 72. Average driving distance last year, 2 years ago, was 286 off the tee. It's pretty short. That was seventh shortest on tour that year. And in the years past, it's always been around 285 to 290. That's kind of been their range. And for a longer course, it's a bit strange to me that the driving distance is so short. But if you look at the holes and even the quotes, so like in my article, I put a little course preview in there this week talking about the guidelines around holes. Like every course has a yardage book, and the head pro will put in like quotes of like how should you play this hole. And I think it was like every single hole, obviously not a par 3, said emphasis on the tee shot, emphasis on the tee shot, placement of the tee shot, precision of the tee shot. Everything revolves around that to get you into position. So I think guys are laying back a bit off the tee on some holes. Again, that's a driving distance average. I'm sure on the par 5s they're wailing on it, but you do see a lot of water. There's a lot of bunkers that line the fairways. So I think guys do take a precautionary attempt at a lot of these tee shots. They're trying to get it in play. It's 7,400 yards, but it's not like they're able to just rip driver and have wedges in. Looking at the green regulation, so green regulation number was pretty high. It was 73%, and looking back in years past, it's always been around 2/3, so 66 to 70%. Actually 73% was the highest, so yeah, 66, 67% on average. Looking down, putting is pretty average through and through. Not too concerned with that. And let's see. Yeah, 3-putt avoidance, not a problem. Approach, not a problem. And I will go ahead and pull up my course preview real quick just to kind of highlight some of the key proximities, because I have them mapped out to figure out what buckets to use for our EAP stats. So let me pull that up real quick. All right, so average proximity overall is 34.5 feet. The average approach distance is 196 yards. And looking at the bucket, so they'll have two, on average, again, every player is a little bit different. On average, they'll have 2 approaches inside of 125 yards. They will have 4 approaches from 125 to 175. They're evenly split, so you could pretty much say 125 to 150 and 150 to 175. And then 175 to 200, they got 1, and then 200 to 225, they have 2. If you look at the par 5s, it's going to be interesting how that plays out to the leaderboard, because they're all going to be over 250 yards for their second shot, trying to get there in 2, if they want to get there in 2. Like, this was one of the lowest going for the green courses in 2018 at only 38%. It was the 3rd most difficult, and it's pretty much been that way every year. It's been in the top 10 for most difficult going for the green. And then, like I said, 2 of those on the par 5s are over 300 yards, which are just not reachable. They're not getting there in 2. So it's a pretty good mix. I think overall with this field strength, it's going to be very difficult to separate out guys that are really popping in any particular category. You're really looking for a well-rounded play that, you know, has some recent form, maybe has some course history. And I'm even going back several years, and it's difficult with the way the greens have changed. But like Cameron Tringale is a guy that I'm going to go to a bit this week. I think he fits the mold. And if you look back at his last 2 results here, they're pretty bad. But if you go back to the first couple years he played here, he's got like 3 top 10s, a 16th in there. And then his last two years he played here was a 78th and a missed cut. Like, I'm not too concerned with the recent results on that because he's been playing so well in the last year. So I am looking at course history, but I don't mind using some longer course history to just see if this course fits someone's eye. So I think that's about it. For key stats, again, it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. Looking at approach, I'm not too concerned with green and regulation. We'll be using the EAP stats on the website, so looking at different proximities and how well guys have been hitting it close the last couple weeks, last couple tournaments. Off the tee is a little sneaky. I kind of mentioned it last week, and it ended up being a putting contest with Kevin Na. But I do think off the tee is an interesting kind of difference factor when you're dialing in your player pool. I do think, like, Henrik Stenson's an interesting one. Like, if you look through, and I'm not trying to jump into the players or anything like that yet, but like if you look through his numbers in the last year, 2 years, he's really dropped off the tee. Like, his irons have always been good, but if you look at just last year, still 2019, the 2019 season, he didn't gain many strokes off the tee cumulative at all that year. I mean, he still had decent finishes, but you can't win that way. Approach is good, but that's the kind of stuff. Just as an example, I want to see someone gaining off the tee more often than not. So use that. And let's go ahead and dive into it. I don't think I missed anything else on the golf course. Let's see. Nope. Pretty straightforward. So you can definitely check out some pictures of the golf course to get a better idea. But let's go ahead and dive into the players. If you are a member, you can go ahead and ask me any questions you want in Slack. I'm always available, as well as Skylar and Axis, who handle a lot of the data and the back end stuff. So let's go ahead and dive in. We'll start with a 10K and up, and we'll work our way down. It's going to be pretty thin. Like, I'm not going to touch on too many values. And when I say values, I mean like under 7,500. There's going to be a handful that I kind of pick from, and I'm probably going to reserve that for my article. I do an article for Rotor Grinders, which is a value article, and then I do a core piece on fantasygolfbag.com, and I'll probably reserve those for that because there's just not a lot down there to pick from, and it'll probably take me a day to make sure that I narrowed out all the ones that I don't want to use and maybe include a few stragglers that are just sneaking in just for GPPs and stuff like that. So as I say that, the 10K and up range is going to be obviously Henrik Stenson 11.4. This is DraftKings pricing. Cameron Champ at 10.8. Brian Harman at 10.6. Daniel Berger at 10.4. And Russell Henley at 10.1. Not sure where people are going to go. I don't know if ownership is going to be as predictive this week. It's just because the pricing gets weird and it's dependent on pricing relative to the people. So I'm curious to see where just like the mental aspect of DFS comes in. But man, Daniel Berger has been up and down for me. I know the very first event he came back, I put in my article, it's Daniel Berger season. You know, if you look at his last couple of events, finishing off the year, finishing 15th, 33rd, 39th. And when he went to the Safeway, I was all about it. And he finished 23rd, so he paid off his price at 7,500, I think he was. But he lost a ton of strokes with his irons, and it was a little bit like take a step back. Like maybe we'll wait a week. And then at the Shriners, he played better and finished 18th. You know, he still lost strokes on approach, but it was much better than what it was at the Safeway. So now he comes to this course, and I really like him coming back to, you know, a course where the driving's a bit more difficult. Like I said, he's losing strokes on approach, not his off the tee. And here over the years, Daniel Berger has gone 25th, 5th, 5th, and 18th. I think this course is similar to TPC Southwind, where he won the FedEx St. Jude. I think a lot of the sight lines off the tee are similar. I think Daniel Berger at 10.4 is probably going to be my guy to go to. I think Henley's going to get some ownership. If you look at his recent form, his course history, He's obviously won here 2 years ago. He's got an 8th, a 5th, a 4th, and a 7th. Like, the course history doesn't get any better than that for anyone on tour besides like Zach Johnson at the John Deere. I think in cash games, maybe he's your guy to go to. Coming in this week, it's been kind of hit or miss. No great finishes, but he's just not doing anything in one category. If he is low owned, so that's where I kind of figure out the ownership. Like, if Henley came in with any decent form, he either wouldn't be 10-1 or he wouldn't be he would be more popular. So I would keep an eye on ownership. For me, it would be Daniel Berger first. I'd just be hitting him at 10-4. I think that's, decent enough value. Again, you're looking for upside at that price. I think he has it. And then Brian Harman has terrible course history, really good recent form, and he might get some ownership. So just those three there are the ones that I'm most interested in. I'll probably pass on Henrik at 11-4. That's a bit rich. And like I said, he's been losing strokes off the tee on this golf course. It shouldn't do as well. Does have good course history. And maybe like, now that I say that off the tee, this is a course where we saw the driving distance at 286, I think. Maybe this is one I could go back in our numbers and see how he plays it, like from a course management standpoint. Maybe this golf course is one where he doesn't have to hit driver, and we all know his 3-wood is good. That's actually pretty interesting now that I think about it. I might have to go back. He's got two second-place finishes in the last 6 years, and then a 6th place in 2018 when Poulter won. So, as I am going through this podcast, I think Stinson might be interesting at 11-4. It'll be super low owned, I assume. And it actually might be one of those places where it suits him really well. Like you take the driver out of his hands. He hits his 3-wood, 280, 290 anyways, and his irons are good. So yeah, I think Champ's probably be my only fade, and then Berger would be my primary. Harman and Henley is dependent on ownership. Harman obviously has the good recent form, terrible course history. Henley has the spotty recent form, but the great course history. So you're trying to, decide there. And I think I'd like to use ownership for that. That's probably the best because it is kind of like a tiebreaker for me. All right. So going down to the 9K range, Scotty Scheffler at 9,900. I'll just go ahead and say it. I think he is a really good value. We saw him kind of sputter last week over the weekend. I don't know if it was Vegas. I don't know if something happened. But I'm not afraid of one bad event. If you look through his start to the year, 7th at the Greenbrier, gained 8 strokes on approach, 3 strokes off the tee. Sanderson Farms, he gained 3 strokes ball striking, so about 1.5 off the tee and approach. And then last week he gained off the tee, which is good for this golf course, but he lost 4.5 strokes on approach. So most of that was lost over the weekend. And I know we talked about in our chat, maybe he went on a serious bender Friday night and Saturday he half recovered, and then maybe he said, screw it, I shot 80 and I'm gonna go on another bender, and then showed up on Sunday. So it is a home game for him. I don't put a lot of emphasis into that. I know people bring up Hostler. Cole Hammer's really cheap this week and is still at UT. I do like that actually as a value play, but I don't put too much stock into the home narrative. I don't see that happening. It's not like a small town. This is Houston. It's pretty big. I don't feel like there's a real big hometown narrative to even play to. But Scotty Scheffler, 9,900. I'll be having some shares there. And that's really it. I'm interested in Kyle Stanley. I think he's actually a good setup for this golf course. But the other guys around him just don't do it for me. There's not a lot. Russell Knox kind of struggled last week. Matt Jones, we're not really sure where his game's at. Like, I know he popped for round 1, I think, last week and then kind of fell. But he's withdrawn twice, I think, this year already with a back injury. So probably not going there. But that's really it. I don't think I can get behind Munoz. McCarthy I played last week, but he's one of those guys that had like a 35% price bump from 6,800, 7,100. Gained 9 strokes putting last week and finished 9th. He gained 8 strokes putting at the Greenbrier, finished 31st. He's a very good putter. At 9,500, I don't think I can just get there. It would be a strictly 20 max, 10 max or I should say 20 max, maybe 10 lineups plus that I would be playing Denny McCarthy. But I think that's probably going to be my guys over 10K, and Scotty Scheffler at 99 I like quite a bit. Going down in the 8K range, I feel a little bit better about this range here than that 9K range. Like I said, there's not a huge difference in talent between those two price ranges. And you could save anywhere from up to $1,000 obviously to $800, $600, which could be very beneficial if it keeps you out of a terrible range in the 6Ks. Cameron Tringale, 8,700, I like quite a lot. If you look at his form coming into this week, he's been great all season actually. And his driver, I think he's picked up like 20 yards, and then doesn't really need to hit driver a ton on this golf course, but I do like seeing that off the tee number. Like I said, kind of at the top of the show. He's been extremely consistent. I think, let's see, going back to just talking about this golf course in general, if we go back to 2012 through 2015, which is one of the first couple years on tour for him, he's finished 8th, 16th, 4th, and 5th during that span. The last 2 years, last 3 years actually, he's really gone on a bad downturn. 57th, miscut. And I think it was more due to his overall game, not necessarily the golf course. So like I said, I think there's only a few guys this year, and I think we've gone over this multiple times. I know Axis have kind of gone back and forth with me about it, and different members on like Kokrak. Like Kokrak was a very spotty player before. He would go and shoot 61, but then followed up with a 74. In this last year, it's been very consistent. Like not a ton of 62s and 63s, but a lot of 67, 68s, and just consistency. Tringale's in the same boat, and I think his numbers are starting to line up closer to what you want to see for this type of golf course. Let's see. Yeah, let me find him. Yeah, so looking back at his last couple events to finish off the year, I think he lost strokes only once, tee to green, which is at the Northern Trust, and that was his only miscut since the Wells Fargo back in May. Starting off the year, he finished 36th at the Greenbrier, 16th at Sanderson Farms, and 44th at the Safeway. Had a little break last week, which is nice. Avoided Vegas, and now he comes here to a course, like I said, it has some really good results in the past. So I do like that quite a bit. Harris English, I know Noto from Roto Grinders likes him quite a bit. If you look at his numbers, he's starting to be very consistent, and it's a bit scary. I hate hopping on late. If you look at his longer term history, it's been very inconsistent. So like you see one or two good events, and it's not something he's back and he's very consistent again. But this is like the trend that we saw from Kokrak. So I would tread lightly. I'm not going to jump all aboard. I wouldn't play him in cash. I feel like he would be pretty popular in cash and single entry. It might be a really good leverage spot if he misses the cut. And this is a good golf course to like blow up on. So not hoping that he does or anyone in this range does. But yeah, off the tee has been great. Approach has been great. Losing strokes are pretty neutral around the green, which is fine. And then putting has been pretty neutral. So he's got two top sixes, and then a 33rd at the Safeway. So Harris English is pretty interesting there at 8,900. Going down below that to we'll say the very bottom range. Bronze and Burgoon, I'm sure I'll have some shares of at 8,400. I think he's just very consistent. I think ball striking's there. He doesn't seem to get very much ownership. So I'll sign up for that. And then Lanto Griffin's interesting, 8K as well. I know Axis brought it up in our chat yesterday, like he's been gaining strokes putting, but he's been doing it with ball striking as well. And at the price, I'm not too concerned with someone just gaining strokes putting. But to start the year off, just to get an idea, granted it's been a lot of golf in a short period of time, since the Greenbrier, he's finished 13th, 11th, 17th, and 18th. He's a Korn Ferry Tour grad, but picking up pretty quick on the PGA Tour. I think he's actually a PGA Tour, quote-unquote veteran. I think he had status about 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, Lanto Griffin at 8K is really interesting. And the last one that I'll mention in this 8K range is Xin Jun Zhuang. He was someone I brought up on like the second show of the year. I think it was for the Sanderson, or for the Safeway, I'm sorry. He is the lead. I think he won the Korn Ferry Tour money list. He had, I think, 1 or 2 wins and then several top 10s. Very consistent player. And then he missed the cut at the Greenbrier to start off the season. I think people were just taken aback. But if you look at his long-term history, we have the Korn Ferry stats available. He was so good on the Korn Ferry Tour. It wasn't a matter of time. It was just a matter of time before he would kind of get his feet under him. So finished 7th at the Safeway, and then 16th last week at the Shriners, gaining 7.5 strokes. Gaining 7.5 strokes tee to green in both of those events. So I think Xin Jun Zhuang is a great option. And at 8K between him and Lanto, I would probably lean Zhang as more of a cash play because I do think Lanto will get some ownership. All right, let's go ahead and hit the 7K range, then we'll get you guys out of here. So kind of some quick hitters at the top of this list. Robbie Shelton at 7,900, certainly going to go back to there. He obviously, I'm just high on him. He's going to be expensive compared to where he was. I think last week he was like 6,900, and I think since the start of the season he's been around 7K, but like been pretty consistent tee to green. He lost strokes tee to green at the Safeway, but like the Greenbrier, he finished 7th. He gained 5 strokes tee to green. Technically 6 strokes on 6.8 strokes ball striking, which is even better. 28th at the Sanderson, 52nd at the Safeway, 42nd at the Shriners. No history. I don't think he's played. No history here, obviously, but very consistent with the ball striking. I like him. He's off the tee is good. Approach is very good. No reason not to kind of plug in Shelton. Laird kind of popped last week for a spurt, so he's interesting. I mean, I say interesting, but he's fine at that price. I think he's probably fairly priced for the most part, but gaining 4 strokes off the tee and a stroke and a half on approach last week, totally fine going back to Laird. And then the one interesting one for me, Richie Werenski. I don't know if people will jump back to that, but he's been gaining strokes off the tee as well. Approach has been okay, and he started off the year great. 3rd at the Greenbrier, 18th at Sanderson Farms. So go ahead and hop on that. That's 7,700 for him, and it seems like a good, quote unquote safe option for sure. As we kind of go down into like the mid 7K range and then below that, there's not a ton to pick from. Like Tom Lewis, I was on last week and he missed the cut. I'll probably hop back on that. There's really no reason not to like him at the price. He's priced the exact same as he was last week. And he's obviously a good player. Won the Korn Ferry Tour finals at the end of the season in August, I think it was. So I don't really have a problem going back to that. It's still an unknown. It would be GPPs only, but definitely fine going there. At the bottom range there, Matt Every is getting some love from several people that I respect, or like I take notice when they're mentioning it. His off the tee game is just awful. He's so inconsistent. So it's certainly a GPP play. But you look at him like last week, gained almost 10 strokes on approach. That's absurd. Like, I know his irons are good, and I'm hoping, like I was thinking about it more when I saw some people bring him up. I'm curious if this course, it's 7,400 yards. I think Bay Hill's around that. Obviously, he won there back-to-back in like 2015, 2016. I'm hoping maybe this course sets up better for him off the tee, kind of like Stinson, where the driver lines are a little bit better for his eye. He gets it in position. His irons are good. He's got a great week. 7,300, if that continues, is actually a pretty cheap price. And then at the bottom range, we'll just kind of cap it off with Doc Redman. Doc Redman is way too cheap, in my opinion. He's still a little bit of a firecracker in the regards that he can blow up. But, yeah, it's 7,200 for him. If you look at his recent form coming in, it doesn't look good from finish positions. But he comes back to Bermuda here, finishing 24th at the Greenbrier, 52nd at Sanderson, miscut of the Safeway, 42nd at Shriners, and he gained strokes off the tee and approach in all 4. So definitely going to be playing Redman. That'll probably be one of my highest exposures, to be honest. He would be cash consideration. He would probably fall into most of my GPP lineups because he is a pretty good value, and he's playing good coming in here. And that's probably going to be it. Like I said, I'm going to hold some of these other ones for those 2 articles I mentioned at the top of the show. There's a couple good names down in the 6K range we can get to. None that really, stand out. Like Zach Suture's one. If you look at his last 2 weeks, he's kind of sneaky coming in this week at 6,600. So I do like that. But there's a couple other ones that I plan to look into a bit more to write up to see if any of them actually have some recent form. Looking through our EAP stats, which you can find on the website. But there's some good opportunities for these cheap guys, and helps you fit in some of the more expensive ones. And most people, like I said, aren't going to come down to the 6K range and dig through them very much. And that could be enough leverage or enough uniqueness in your lineups to, capture 1 or 2 of these guys with a top 10 performance, maybe a top 20 performance even. But it gets you some more consistent players at the top range that balances your lineup. So I'll leave it there, guys. Of course, you can find me on Twitter at Redkacheek. All of our work, so the stats, rolling stats, stat model, the EAP stats that we talk about a lot that we're really proud of, you can find all of that at fantasygolfbag.com. We're running a couple promos, but certainly if you go to the website, have any questions, you can reach out to me personally, or you can reach out to Axis or Skylar on Twitter. So I think that'll do it, guys. Like I said, go listen to Axis's podcast for the Euro Tour. Enjoy this week. Like I said, it's not a fun week in terms of having a bunch of studs, but I think for DFS, this makes it very interesting. It makes you think through a little bit more of your process and trying to figure out your lineup construction. So I'm looking forward to it. We'll talk to you probably later this week, and hope you guys have a great week at the Houston Open. Hope you guys enjoy the European Tour as well, and we will talk to you next week as we continue through this fall swing. See ya.